Have you ever been so completely lost in an activity that the rest of the world just melts away? You're not really thinking, you're just doing. Time gets all weird and you feel amazing. Well, that state is called flow. You've probably called it being in the zone, and it might just be the key to a truly satisfying life. But to really get why we need it so much, we gotta start with a really strange paradox of modern life.
So here's this huge paradox we need to tackle. In a lot of developed countries, people have more stuff, more material wealth than at any other point in human history. So the big question is, why aren't we any happier? It's something that has had researchers scratching their heads for decades. And when you look at the hard data, the story is pretty wild. Take the United States, for example. Since 1956, the percentage of people who say they are very happy has been stuck right around 30%. It's totally flat. But over that exact same time, personal income has nearly tripled. And that's even after you adjust for inflation. It's pretty clear proof that once our basic needs are covered, more money just doesn't equal more happiness. So what does?
To get to the bottom of that, we have to meet the guy who dedicated his entire life to this question. The psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. He was on a quest to figure out what actually makes life worth living.
For Csikszentmihalyi, this wasn't just some academic exercise. It was deeply personal. He grew up in Europe during World War II and saw firsthand how adults' lives were just shattered. Their jobs, their homes, their security, all of it, gone. And yet, he noticed a small handful of them were somehow able to find a sense of purpose and even contentment in all that chaos. He became absolutely obsessed with understanding how they did it.
So his research led him to study people who found this incredible meaning in what they did. Artists, scientists, composers, people who weren't really motivated by fame or money. And all that work came together in his groundbreaking 1990 book, which introduced the world to this idea of flow, the psychology of the optimal experience.
So what exactly is flow? Well, Csikszentmihalyi describes it as this state of mind where you are so totally absorbed in what you're doing that literally everything else just disappears. It's this almost euphoric feeling of deep, effortless involvement. And this, he argued, is the real secret sauce for lasting happiness.
The people he talked to described it in these almost mystical ways. I mean, listen to this from a composer. He said, it's an ecstatic state where you feel like you almost don't exist. The music just flows out of itself. His own identity just vanishes.
And here's another one. A poet described the feeling as opening a door that floats in the sky. I mean, what a perfect metaphor for stepping into this other reality of just pure focused creation. It's that effortless, almost spontaneous feeling that really defines it.
And it's not just for artists, right? This is the cool part. An Olympic skater used almost the exact same words to describe her experience on the ice. She said, you don't think, it just goes automatically. You merge with the music. It's that peak state for athletes, for coders, for surgeons, really for anyone doing a complex task.
So across literally thousands of interviews, with everyone from Himalayan climbers to Navajo shepherds, Csikszentmihalyi found 8 universal things that are always present in a flow state. Basically, it all boils down to this. You know exactly what you need to do, you know right away how well you're doing it, and you get so absorbed that you forget yourself and time just gets all bendy. And when those things are in place, the activity itself becomes the reward. So the whole thing really boils down to this classic formula. Flow happens in that sweet spot where the challenge of what you're doing is high, but your skill level is high enough to meet it. If it's too easy, you're bored. If it's too hard, you're anxious. But right in that perfect channel between boredom and anxiety, that's where you find flow.
But, like with any big idea, the reality is, well, it's a little more complicated. Is being in the zone always a good thing? The answer might actually surprise you. Okay, first things first, it is really important to separate flow from something called hyperfocus, which is a state you see a lot with ADHD. They look similar on the outside, but there's a huge difference. In flow, you're still kind of aware of your surroundings. With hyperfocus, the outside world completely ceases to exist. And that can actually be a problem, right? It can make you ignore really important things, like completely missing a doctor's appointment because you're so deep into a video game.
And then there's a darker critique. Some people argue that the whole concept of flow can be used to justify, putting up with terrible situations. Csikszentmihalyi himself suggested that even people in forced labor camps could find flow. But, as one critic points out, that kind of thinking opens a really dangerous door to manipulating people into becoming these productive machines, no matter how awful their situation is.
And this brings up a really tough question. Csikszentmihalyi's big argument was that your satisfaction with your job depends more on your attitude than the actual job itself. But is that really sustainable in the long run?
A different psychological framework called self-determination theory would say absolutely not. It says you can't have a truly optimal experience when you feel like you're being forced to do something, when it's not coming from your own inner drive.
So, with all that nuance in mind, this brings us to a really fascinating new development in the research. It turns out that classic formula for flow, well, it might be missing a super important ingredient.
So we all remember the classic formula, right? It's simple. Magic happens when a really high challenge meets your really high level of skill.
But what if there's one more piece to the puzzle? A piece that researchers have really only started to understand pretty recently.
The real secret ingredient is uncertainty. See, it's not enough for the task to just be difficult. The outcome can't be a sure thing.
A researcher at Stanford, David Melnikov, puts it perfectly. He says to get into flow, you need to feel like, I might nail this or I might totally flounder. Let's find out. It's that curiosity about an outcome that isn't guaranteed, that little bit of exciting risk that you might fail. That's what really grabs your attention and pulls you into the zone.
Okay, so now that we have this more complete picture, how can we actually use all this? How can we intentionally design our work, our hobbies, and our lives to get more of this flow state?
Here's a 5-step playbook for how to engineer flow. 1. Set super clear goals. You got to know what you're aiming for. 2. Get rid of all distractions. You need that deep focus. 3. You have to find that sweet spot between the challenge and your skill. 4. And this is the new secret sauce. You need to inject some reducible uncertainty. Make it a game, add a timer, do something to spark that curiosity about whether you'll succeed. And finally, number 5, you need immediate feedback so you know how you're doing and you can adjust as you go. And that brings us to the final question, which is really for you. Think about your own life, your job, your hobbies, maybe even your chores. What is one single activity that you could redesign using these steps to get a little more of that deeply satisfying, optimal state of flow?